Morning guys, I'm Dave Canterbury with the Pathfinder School, and what I thought we'd do today is have a discussion about fire mentality. And the reason I want to have this discussion today is because char and charring material to me is a very important aspect of fire when I consider the next fire. And I teach it at the Pathfinder basic class as a basic requirement to understand how to make viable char from different materials, because I think it's so important. And I wanted to discuss with you today a little bit about why I have that mentality, because when I made a video the other day and used a knife and a rock to make a fire, a lot of people seem to have misunderstood the intentions of that video and misunderstood the viability of char for making fire, especially the next fire. So let's start off with what I carry for ignition sources in my kit. I carry a Bic lighter, a magnifying glass, and a Ferrocerium rod. That's the only three ignition sources that I carry, because I believe those three are the most versatile ignition sources. My always go-to first is going to be the lighter, period. Flick the Bic, instant gratification, everybody loves that. I have flame. The downfall of the lighter is that it runs out of fluid over time. It's very susceptible to cold, and it is also not real good in high wind type situations unless you can get it out of the wind and get that extended flame. I don't carry matches whatsoever because I carry the lighter, and I believe that's a step backwards. It's the same reason I don't carry a specific steel striker for flint and steel, because I have the Ferrocerium rod and it throws hotter sparks than the flint and steel will throw. But the flint and steel is like a last resort that I can utilize my kit more multifunctionally by using a high carbon steel knife and pick up a rock to ignite char, just as if I were going to have to understand how to make a bow drill fire in an extreme emergency. And I have several videos on my channel of how to make bow drill fires and bow drill sets off the landscape. You can look those videos up. They're in my fire series, my fire crafting series of videos in that playlist. So let's get started, because I want to talk about quite a few things today. Okay, let's start off by talking about Ferrocerium rods to begin with, okay? And anybody who has a Ferrocerium rod and uses it very often is going to get what I like to call speed bumps on the rod. And that speed bumps come from uneven downward pressure across the surface area of the rod, and they cause ripples on the rod. And your rod will become nearly unusable over time because of those ripples, but you can get rid of those very easily. What you need to do is you need to take your knife, taking advantage again of that 90-degree edge, get that thing on a solid surface somewhere and just scrape through those. Scrape those completely off of there. You're not trying to make sparks at this point. All you're trying to do is clean that rod up and get back to a smooth striking surface. You can see all that stuff, that lit fire there that came off that rod. Now, if you're doing this and you're getting your rod cleaned up before you start a fire, save all those shavings, because obviously they're a good resource. Once you get this smoothed back out again to a smooth surface, you'll then be able to use your knife to make those sparks again, and it'll work just fine for you. If you build those ripples up again over time, just do the same thing and smooth them out with your knife and they'll be fine. Okay, so before we start our first fire, and I'll consider this the fire that we're going to use whatever emergency fire starting implement we have. Once you've done that, you're going to want to char something, and you can use cotton material of any kind or linen. Any 100% natural material will make char. But you are expending a resource from your kit by doing that, because this could be your cotton bandana, your bandages, your wash rag, and lots of other things. So you're better off trying to char some natural material. And you'll just have to experiment with what works best for you, but there's lots of tree funguses and things like that that will char well. One of the things that I like really well is this hibiscus plant. And this is a flowering plant that has a very, very soft wood on the inside and a hollow pith. Now, coincidentally, the bark strips off of here and makes great bird nest material. But if you break these stalks down you'll feel that soft pith inside them. And again, this is a hibiscus plant. It grows in wet areas. But this chars very, very well. So I'll break this into smaller pieces. And if I am stuck with only my 5 or 10 Cs, again, I promote that container, that metal container, for a reason. That metal container and that nesting cup make a great chamber for creating char in an emergency. If you're walking around, messing around in the woods doing bushcraft, or whatever the case may be, you can then use something like a char tin. And I use a tin that is basically just a coffee tin of some sort that I found at a dollar store. It just happened to have 2 lids. And I've poked a hole inside this lid to make my char, and then I have another lid in it. Because there's a recessed point in here, it makes it very conducive to just drop a piece of flint rock in there to use in conjunction with my high carbon steel tool to make sparks. And again, it's not something you can just go out and buy. It's just something that I found over time, just looking and looking and looking, and always thinking about what else can I use that for when I see it. Like I said, I think it came from a dollar store for like $1. So, okay, so as I process this stuff down, I know people are going to ask me about this knife. And this knife is the new Jeff White Sloyd. And Sloyd is a Swedish word, and the closest translation of that to English would be handcraft or handicraft. So this is basically a crafting knife. It could be worn around the neck in camp in a neck type sheath, just like a Mora. And it's basically my answer to an American made crafting knife. And small crafting knives like this were used all along the Appalachian areas of the frontier, as well as into the late 1800s, by people who were just making crafts from wood at their house to help sustain their family's living. From rocking chairs to rakes to pitchforks, all those types of things that were handmade with draw knives and axes. They used a Sloyd style knife or a carving style knife, and this is our carving style knife called the Sloyd by Jeff White. But I'm using this just to come through here and split these open. And I'm going to put them in the tin so that we can char them once we get our first fire started. So I'm prepping this material for charring before I start my fire. And it doesn't matter if I've got some material in there already that's charred. It's not going to hurt anything. You can't overdo char unless you let oxygen into the container. If you let oxygen into the container, your char is going to be done. The pretense of making char is that you're starving it of oxygen and you're turning it into carbon. You're carbonizing the material and making like a charcoal. So that's what we're doing with this pithy stalk. And I'm just kind of removing this outer bark from it and breaking it into a little bit smaller pieces. Remember that anything that you char is going to shrink quite a bit from its current state once it becomes charred. And I'm just going to get this container partially filled up. I wanted to show you what this material looked like. It's very, very easy to work with. You can just poke the point of your knife into it and split it down. But it is a good material. And any pithy plant material like that, even from like a mullein stalk or something like that, would work good for charred material. Of course, you can char cattail heads. There's lots and lots of things that you can char. If you can find punky rotten wood that's not too far gone, you can char that. So I would suggest, again, that you just go out and do the dirt time and get out there and find what works for you. So we've got several chunks in our tin now, and we'll put our lid on it. Now we're going to get our fire built. And once we get our fire going, we're going to char material so that we can ensure our next fire is easier to make. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. All right, I've got some tulip poplar bark here. I've got some pine needles here. I've got all of that stuff as well. I'm just going to give myself, I've got a small stick of cedar here. Just going to give myself a few shavings to keep things going once it starts. And then just give myself a few longer pieces. Split down like this. And this is just creating kindling basically more than anything else. Not a necessity if you can find enough small sticks. If you can't find enough small sticks, then maybe it becomes a little more necessary. So we can add this to a smaller bird nest of material like some tulip poplar bark if we don't have very much of it, and it will just give us something that will quickly flame up when we start our fire. Okay, I'm trying to kind of keep this stuff real time for you guys. As you can see, I don't have a lot of tulip poplar bark here. I've got a small bird nest, but it's not a ton. And I've got my shavings sitting over here on a stump. I've got some other pieces of bark and some more of that hibiscus that weren't processed down very well. So let's see if we can get this going. First of all, we'll add a little bit of tinder to that, and then we'll take our stick pile, put it right on top just like that, and let her get going. Now once we get a good fire going here, you know, I'm just going to go ahead and stick this char tin right in there. And as I'm building this thing up, I'm making char. And that's important. I got some dead pine here I'm going to put on top of this thing. Just really let this thing go to work. All right, now we just let her eat. Now with this charred material, you know, you'll see smoke escaping from the hole or from the hinges or whatever you're using as a container. If it's your water bottle and cup, you'll see smoke coming out of there. And when the smoke quits coming out, it's basically done. But you're not going to overdo the char if you leave it in there. So I usually just leave it in there till the fire burns down a little bit, and then I get it out and worry about it. You just got to make sure that the container's cool before you open it. That's the key. Okay, so now that our tin is cooled down, we can look at these contents. And you can see I've still got the charred material in there from before. I got a piece of rope and I've got some material in there. But I also have all of this charred inner pith of the hibiscus plant. And it will work with a Ferrocerium rod exactly the same way that it works with flint and steel. And that's an advantage. So let's kind of take this and put it inside this lid of this tin so it doesn't fly all over the place in this wind on us. Just like this. And we can break it up a little bit in there, like that, to expose some surface area without making it a dust. And we can then take our knife and as soon as we hit one of those with a spark, that dude was on fire. I hope you guys can see that. So it took nothing to light that up. And we can do the exact same thing with our magnifying glass. We can do the exact same thing with flint and steel. And we can do the exact same thing with a spent lighter that will only throw sparks. So charred material is a very viable option to make it easier for you to start the next fire. And that's the importance of all of this, is our first fire that we start in an emergency scenario may very well be the most difficult one, especially if we had to do it with a bow drill fire off the landscape. So making charred material for our second fire or our next fire is going to make it that much easier for us, whether it involves a rock on our knife or the sun, if yesterday was not sunny and today is sunny. All of those things make it easier with charred material, and that's why charred material is such a viable resource that you should create at the first opportunity in an emergency scenario. Guys, I hope that gives you a little better understanding of my methodology when it comes to fire. Again, I promote 3 items in a fire kit beyond a shadow of a doubt. A brand new Bic lighter, a nice big 6" by 1/2" Ferrocerium rod, and a 5-power nice big magnifying glass. Those 3 ignition sources will give you a lot of options in a lot of weather conditions. They also expend different amounts of resources within your kit. They can be combined with other resources in your kit to make them more viable depending on the situation. And then you can make charred material with your very first fire that you've established to give yourself even more versatility with all 3 of those ignition sources. I'm Dave Canterbury with the Pathfinder School. I appreciate you joining me today. I thank you for everything you do for our school, for our family, and for our business, for all of our sponsors, instructors, affiliates, and friends. I'll be back with another video as soon as I can. Thanks, guys.